preschool class was asked to draw what they wanted to be when they grew up. And as the kids went about drawing pictures of their desired occupation or whatever it is they thought about, one little girl was really struggling and really having a hard time getting started. And the teacher came over to see what the problem was. And she finally said with exasperation, she said, "Well, when I grow up, I want to be married, but I don't know how to draw it." Well, have you ever felt that way about marriage? You want a sound, solid, stable, healthy, happy marriage, but you're not quite sure what that means. You're not quite sure how to draw it. During the past 49 years plus, I've given that a lot of thought. I've experienced something about it, my wife and I. I've studied about it. I've read what God had to say about it. And I feel like if there's ever a time in my life where I'm qualified to talk to you a little bit about marriage, it certainly would be now. We began a couple weeks ago with this series we're calling Home Improvement. We're going to look at several lessons. We've already looked at 2 of them. We're going to look at 2 more today, one this morning and one tonight, as we think about how we can improve our homes. And we advanced the notion then that any of us, when it comes to our physical place of dwelling, understand that you don't live there forever without having something done. The shingles need to be replaced, or the air conditioning system goes out, needs to be cleaned, needs to be maintained. Things happen. We understand the need for improvement. And yet, isn't it amazing that the occupants that live in that home can think they don't need any improvement or any enrichment, that they can just go along the way they've always been and never work at any change? Not really so. We need improvement. We need to work at it. So this morning, I want to talk to you about the 7 secrets of a satisfying marriage. We're sure glad you're with us this morning. We have a number of guests, and we welcome you, and you're glad you've come to be in our worship assembly this morning. And I really would like for you to come back tonight and hear this next part of this lesson, of this series, because both of these today are going to be about as practical as you can possibly get as we draw on principles from the Word of God. See, one of the things that I've kind of learned about marriage is that my wife is not too impressed with how much I know about it or how good a sermon I can preach about it. She's more concerned to how good a job I do practicing it. And I suspect that your husband or wife is that way as well. So I want to give you some things you can use, some biblical principles applied that will help you have a satisfying marriage. And the first of those is a commitment to the relationship of marriage. And one of the great challenges that we face today is a lack of commitment. I mean, there was a time when I was a kid growing up just a few years ago. I know that's funny. Well, you know, there was a time in the 50s and 60s and before. Well, I didn't know anybody that was divorced. In the little school that I went to in Cartersburg, Indiana, there wasn't a single classmate of mine that was divorced. Their parents were divorced. You know, I've talked to teachers today that in first grade, the teachers will tell you that 23 out of 26 of the kids have a different last name than their parents. That there are just so many people that are divorced. People today don't have a commitment to the relationship of marriage. And I'm amazed sometimes to even talk to young Christians. They seem to enter into marriage with the notion, well, if it doesn't work out, we can just get a divorce. Divorce is not scandalous anymore. It's not looked on down by society, and it is accepted more and more even by the people of God. You know, God has never really approved of divorce. He allowed, Jesus said in Matthew 19, the putting away, and he said he allowed it because of the hardness of your hearts. It wasn't because he thought it was a good thing. Back to the book of Malachi in chapter 2 and verse 16, the prophet Malachi told God's people then that God hates divorce. And I want to tell you that's still true today, ladies and gentlemen. God hates divorce. Now, I recognize that in order to decide there's bound to be some people that have been divorced. And I also recognize, though we haven't gotten into that into this study yet,
that there is a biblical reason that Jesus gives in Matthew 19 that you can lawfully and scripturally put away your spouse and be free to marry someone else. The Bible teaches that. Teaches there's one reason, sexual immorality. But you know, anytime there's a divorce, regardless of the reason, whether you have the right or not, that's not a good thing. Sin has occurred. On the part of somebody or both parties in that marriage, sin's occurred. And God is not pleased that any marriage reaches the point that divorce takes place. There's some that seem to have the notion, well, that just applies to Christians. But you know, God instituted marriage prior to the kingdom coming, prior to the law of Christ, even prior to the law of Moses. We noticed in our very first lesson, back in the very beginning in Genesis, God said, it's not good that a man should be alone. I will make a help comparable or suitable for him. And so God ordained and instituted and arranged the home and marriage in the Garden of Eden. It goes all the way back to that. And so Jesus would say in Matthew 19, verse 6, what God has joined together, let not man separate. It's God that joins the husband and wife together. It's God that ordained that relationship. And we must be committed to the relationship of marriage. And what do I mean by committed to it? Well, a commitment to the relationship of marriage is to be willing to stay married even when we're unhappy until we can work it out. There are going to be ups and downs. There's going to be problems. There's going to be challenges. That it's not going to be in a static state of happiness all of your life. And anybody's been married very long has figured that out already. But sometimes young couples don't feel that way. Like one fellow that said that he felt cheated in his marriage. He said, when I got married, it started off ideal. And then he said it turned to an ordeal. He said, now I'm looking for a new deal. What happened? Well, good marriages just don't happen. They take work. They take effort. They take a willingness to do the things that need to be done to make the relationship work. And so you must begin with a commitment to the relationship of marriage. And if we don't have that commitment, a biblical commitment, a commitment to the Lord about that, we're going to be in problem. Our marriage is what we make it. I've heard people say, well, the grass is greener on the other side. You know what I say? The grass is greener where you water it. And the problem is many times that we're not watering the grass where we are. People find themselves in situations where they begin to flirt with people at work or a neighbor or a friend or somebody and begin to water that, and it looks much more appealing than what is at home. I wondered if we took the amount of energy and time and effort to focus upon our marriage relationship to make it better and look at the positives and look at areas of agreement and find solutions as we did looking somewhere else. Marriages would be healthier. So it begins with that. But then secondly, it involves a communication of thoughts. Since I have been studying the idea of marriage, I mean, this goes back probably from almost the beginning days of preaching. Almost every survey, every marriage counselor will tell you that the number one problem in marriage, and it's not what most people think. Most people think it's a money problem or it's an in-law problem or it's an intimacy issue. You know, that's not really true. The number one problem in marriage is communication. It is the communication of thoughts. One survey I came across said that the average couple only talks to each other 4 minutes a day. That's hard for me to believe, but that's what the survey said. 4 minutes a day. That's 28 minutes a week. Well, no wonder marriages are in trouble. And I know when people come to me sometimes for counseling, and a lot of times, guys, let's be honest, it's just men. And she will say, he won't talk. And I look at him and I say, is that right? He go, huh. Men sometimes are not very verbal. We need to communicate. Dr. Paul Faulkner said, communication is to love what blood is to the body. When communication stops, love begins to die. You think about the amount of time we spend doing other things, watching television, or any number of activities. And if we're just putting a few minutes a day into communicating with our spouse, we're going to have a problem. The Bible speaks the principles of good communication. I mentioned in the first couple of lessons that I'm afraid a lot of times we take the Bible and we look at it in a vacuum and look at the principles, the commands of it, without regard to specific application. And it's just kind of an outgoing thing like it applies in the church or the church building or among brethren. Well, think about these biblical principles of communication and apply them to your marriage. For instance, how about telling the truth? How about speaking honestly to one another? In the text in Ephesians, it's kind of interesting when you get into Ephesians 5:22 and down through about 6:4, and it talks about the husband-wife and the parent-child relationship, and sometimes we isolate that. But once you get past the first 4 chapters down through about verse 16 of Ephesians, about Christ and the church, then beginning of verse 17, he talks about the Christian walk, and not to walk as other Gentiles walk. And from 4:17 on down, he begins to talk about these principles, and they just morph into the home. And I think we have isolated 4:17 and chapter 5 from the latter part of what he says about the home. In Ephesians 4:25, he said, therefore put away lying, and let every one of you, each one of you, speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Lying is a sin. In fact, the wise man said in the book of Proverbs that there's 6 things the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination, and one is a lying tongue. Now, that's true across the board. I think I mentioned in the sermon a couple of weeks ago about parents and children being honest to each other and children not lying to their parents. Well, a good place to role model this honesty is with one another. Because I tell you, kids are sponges. And they can pick up on your communication and things you say to one another and whether or not you're being truthful with one another. Are you being honest with one another as a husband and wife? Are you telling the truth to one another? Are you covering up things and hiding things and being dishonest with one another? Communication of thoughts means to begin to be truthful. And then secondly, to say it kindly. Now, you can say something that's true, but maybe it's unkind. Or it's spoken in a way that is hurtful or derogatory or disrespectful. In this same text, in Ephesians 4, he said, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification. And then he said, be kind one to another. Now, what if we could just take this one point and we could just work at being kinder to one another? To be kind to your husband, to be kind to your wife, not to allow corrupt communication. As long as I've been doing this, I'm still amazed sometimes as people come to me and I hear about the ugly things the husbands and wives say to each other, the unkind things, sometimes vulgar things that they say to one another. Speak kindly. Speak with love. And then thirdly, avoid anger. In Proverbs chapter 15 and in verse 1, the wise man said, a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Now, I won't ask for a show of hands on this, because I know how many would go up if everybody's speaking the truth. Have you ever gotten into a discussion and one of you got angry and you said something in anger, and what happened to the discussion? It escalated into a bad argument, didn't it? It never got better. You never said an angry word to your husband or wife and it got better. It just doesn't happen that way. That angry words, that harsh words are going to stir up anger. But when we answer gently and kindly and softly, it helps to turn away wrath and anger. And then how about encouraging words, positive words, upbuilding words, edifying words? The wise man put it this way in Proverbs 16 verse 24, pleasant words are like a honeycomb and sweetness of the soul and health to the bones. Or how about Proverbs 12 and 25? Heaviness in the heart of a man makes it stoop, but a good word makes it glad. You know, ladies, your husband would like to hear a good word, an encouraging word, an uplifting word when he comes home from a hard day. And gentlemen, your wives would like to hear a positive word and not a complaining word about the work that she does. And then learn to listen. James 1:19 tells us that we need to be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Communication of thoughts is so important if we're going to have a solid, sound relationship. And this involves sharing your feelings and your hopes and your dreams and your vision. Well, the third secret to a satisfying marriage is a consideration of one another's feelings. Consideration means to pay attention to listen to what the other person is saying and what they're feeling. It means showing common courtesy. It means showing regard for one another. It means paying attention to one another. It means being thoughtful. Guys, it means waiting till she has both legs in the car before you take off. Okay? All right? It means sometimes bringing in the groceries even when it's the fourth quarter and the game is tied. And she comes in and says, "Can you help me with the groceries?" If you got a problem with that, then you don't have TiVo. See? That's why God made that, you see. So you can pause that thing and go help her with the groceries. That's a consideration of feelings. At the beginning of the year, we did a series of 9 lessons from 1 Corinthians 13 about love. And in that study, we took entire lessons and talked about love being kind. But love is kind. In other words, there is a consideration of feelings. Or in verse 5, he says, love is not rude. One version translates that, love has good manners. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, a passage that you will note a few times today, husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives. Be considerate. Be understanding. Be gentle. Take into account the way she feels. Several years ago, I came across someone, I don't know who the author is. It's called 5 Stages of a Married Cold. You're going to like this. First year, baby darling, I'm worried about that sniffle, so I've called the paramedics to rush you to the UCLA Medical Center for a checkup and a week of rest. And I know you don't like hospital food. I'm having meals catered in. Second year, sweetheart, I don't like the sound of that cough. I've arranged for Dr. Johnson to make a house call. Let me tuck you in bed. Third year, you look like you've got a fever. Why don't you drive yourself over to the Meadow Stop and I'll get some medicine and watch the kids. Oh, it gets better. Fourth year, look, be sensible. After you fed and bathed the kids and washed the dishes, you really ought to go to bed. Fifth year, for Pete's sakes, do you have to cough so loud? I can barely hear the television. Would you mind going to the other room while this show is going on? You sound like a barking dog. Well, I hear some nervous laughter. And it may be because I guess a little too close to home, you suppose. That we start out, you see, with all of those kinds of nice feelings for one another. And then as time goes along, we lose the idea of being considerate of one another's feelings. You want to improve your marriage? Just learn to be a little bit more considerate of your husband or wife's feelings. And then number 4 is compromise during conflict. In 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 5, it says, love doesn't demand its own way. Now, all marriages are going to have conflict. No matter how much in love you are, no matter how much you love your mate, there's going to be some things with which you have a disagreement. And if you don't learn to compromise on those things, you're going to have a relationship problem. I mean, you just are. Love doesn't demand its own way. What? You mean there might be another way? There might be another opinion? There might be another approach? Now, for some of you singles, that may be thinking about getting married, or some of you that have just been married a short time that hadn't even got to all of these yet. Those of us who have been married a while learn that you have to compromise on vacations, where you're going to go, how much you're going to spend, how long you're going to stay. You're going to have to compromise on visiting relatives and what holidays and where you go, what holiday. You're going to have to compromise at times on how your money is spent, on what is a priority. You have to compromise on how to spend leisure time and recreation. You're going to have to deal with how to raise your children. I dare say that most of us, before we got married, never on a date sat and talked about parenting philosophy. We just probably didn't. If you did, you're the exception. And we might not even thought about it when we were expecting children. Or maybe really even in those very early days of infancy. But the kids get a little age on them, and now you got to start disciplining, and somebody's shocked, either he or her, about the way you discipline the kids. You have to work on that together. It's going to take compromise, how you raise your children, discipline your kids. You know, you may even have to compromise on what kind of milk you're going to buy. Now, I never thought I'd have to compromise on that. I mean, I grew up, our milk was out in the barn, and my mother went and milked the cow and brought it in. It was wonderful. Now, when we started buying it at the store, it wasn't as wonderful. But somebody, and I wish I knew who they were so I could write them a nasty letter, come up with milk that tastes like white water. It's called 2% and 1%. And my loving wife, bless her heart, has decided that's better for us. I drink 2% milk now. It's not worth fussing over. Some things you got to compromise on. Secret to marriage is courtship after marriage. Here's the problem. And Dr. Gary Smalley talks about this in his marriage series. He said men are hunters. They're achievement-oriented. They are goal-directed. And so a man woos a woman. He romances a woman. He decides it's time that he ought to be married. But the moment they're married, he doesn't necessarily consciously decide this, but subconsciously he thinks, oh, mission accomplished. I'm married. And so now his next goal is to provide for this woman and to be successful and to build his business or his occupation or profession. Another part of the problem is that we see each other at the very worst times of day. Unshaven, unkempt, looks like her hair's been combed with an egg beater, you know, and all of that. Tired, emotionally drained. And so sometimes the romance can kind of fade away from the marriage. And there's not courtship after marriage. Here's God's plan for your marriage and your mate. Ecclesiastes 9:9. Live joyfully with your wife, whom you love all the days of your life. It's to be a happy relationship, a joyful relationship. Or as the wise man put it in Proverbs 5, he said, rejoice with the wife of your youth, and always, and here it is, be enraptured with her love. Be enraptured with her love. What happens is that too many guys become enraptured by some other woman. And they see some gal at work that looks prettier, or they think is smarter, or whatever she is. And they become enraptured with her. And then a problem ensues. This simple proverb of 3,000 years ago, if we could just be enraptured with our own wife and love her. Courtship after marriage. Now, the big problem is, how do you do this? Let me just throw out a few quick suggestions. How about having a date night? Married couples. At least once a month. Now, my wife and I like to have a date night once a week. But maybe that doesn't work for you, but at least once a month. Young couples that have small children, you need to get away from your kids at least once a month. You say, well, I can't afford babysitting. Well, team up with another young couple that's got kids and switch off and watch each other's kids and go out together. Spend some time together. You need a weekend away once in a while. Now, depending on your time schedule and finances and all that, but you need to get away. When we went back to Ohio for this meeting, it's the first place I preached when we first started preaching full time, and we saw a lady there that was Kenny's first babysitter. Kenny was 2 months old when he had his first babysitter. He said, "We need to go out. we need to go out and do something." And so we called Bonnie Kaufman. Got a picture of her with Kenny and Bonnie, first babysitter. "Oh no, I can't leave my kids." Yes, you can. And you need to once in a while. You need to go out together. You need to spend some time together. You need to develop some mutual interest. You know, any marriage where he has his interest and she has her interest, and the two never come together, it's not going to be a strong marriage. It's going to be a stronger marriage when you find things in common that you enjoy doing together. And that could be any of 1,000 things. You need to put your kids to bed at a decent time so you got a little time in the evening to talk and spend some time together. You need to remember the special days, the holidays and birthdays and anniversaries and things like that. And then every once in a while you need to do something when it's not one of those special days, just because you love one another. That's courtship after marriage. And then number 6, Christ needs to be at the center of your relationship. I guess you have caught the theme of our song service today, that Hugh, in his wonderful way and leading singing, has put together songs that exalted Christ. Jesus is Lord. And that's not just true as we come into this building, as we wear the name Christian, as we call ourselves the Church of Christ. That's true in our lives. We wear the name Christian. Is Christ the head of our house? Is he the center of our relationship? Yes, you need communication and consideration and compromise and courtship and commitment. But without Christ, you will lack the staying power to accomplish these things, because when human love wears out, divine love will conquer everything. The greatest thing you can do for your marriage is put Christ in the very center of it. And so Paul would say, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. And then Paul told Titus, admonish the young women to love their husbands, so that the word of God be not blasphemed. Put Christ in the center. He will never forsake you. He will never leave you. You can always go to him with concerns and challenges and in time of crisis. And he will supply help and hope for your home. How do you do that? Well, first of all, you have to be a Christian. You put Christ in the center when you're a Christian. And then you allow the commitment of your home to revolve around him. And then you make him number one before anybody else. And then you work, as Paul said in Philippians 2:5, to have the attitude of Christ in everything that you do. And in your interaction with one another. And you say, what would the Lord do? What would Christ have me to do? Now, I've run out of time, and so I can't do number 7. Number 7, I have to be tonight, so if you want the rest of this, you got to come back tonight. And we'll talk about the 7th secret of a satisfying marriage. When I was putting this lesson together, I came across an old piece by an unknown author. And I'd used it years and years ago, and it kind of got filed away, and I forgot about it. And it didn't mean as much to me then as it means now, after being married 49 years. But as I close with this would be my wish for each of you, and especially you young couples that are starting out. It's entitled Together Still. Let me hold your hand as we go downhill. We've shared our strength, and we share it still. It hasn't been easy to make the climb, but the way was eased by your hand and mine. Like the lake, our life has had some ripples too, ill health and worries and payments due, with happy pauses along the way, a graduation, a raise in pay. At the foot of the slope we will stop and rest,
Look back if you wish. We've been truly blessed. We've been shared the grief of being torn apart by death or divorce or a broken heart. The view ahead is one of the best. Just a little bit farther, and then we can rest. We move more slowly, but together still. Let me hold your hand as we go down the aisle. That's God's plan for you, my friend. And I wish it for each other. As we close our service this morning, we close with a song of encouragement. We invite you to come to Christ and make Him the center of your life. Your home is not a Christian home. Make it a Christian home. Do what you need to do to make it the way the Lord would have it. Together we stand.